A few years ago, I was helping my uncle clean out his garage because he was getting ready to move out of the house he'd lived in for almost 20 years. It was one of those weekends where you think you're just going to do something simple, like sort through a few boxes, and then suddenly you're knee-deep in old furniture, dusty tools, and piles of things nobody has touched in a decade. The garage was packed from floor to ceiling. There were shelves along every wall stacked with paint cans, camping gear, Christmas decorations, and random containers with faded labels. It smelled like motor oil and cardboard, and the only light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. My uncle was in a good mood, talking about how nice it would be to finally have less stuff, but you could tell the process was exhausting for him. Every other box had some memory attached to it, and it kept slowing everything down. At one point, he pointed up toward the top shelf near the ceiling and said there was a heavy storage bin up there that needed to come down. He told me it was probably full of old paperwork and tools, and he didn't want to leave it behind. The only way to reach it was with this old aluminum ladder that had been sitting in the corner of the garage for as long as I could remember. It was one of those folding ladders with hinges in the middle, the kind that always feels slightly unstable no matter how new it is. I pulled it out and set it up beneath the shelf. At first glance, it looked fine. A little scratched, a little dusty, but nothing that seemed dangerous. My uncle was standing nearby, sorting through something in a box, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. So I climbed up slowly, one step at a time, keeping my weight centered. The garage was quiet, except for the faint creak of metal as the ladder shifted slightly under me. That sound is normal, but when you're halfway up, it suddenly feels louder than it should. I reached the top step and stretched my arms toward the bin. It was pushed farther back than I expected, so I had to lean forward a little to get a good grip. The moment my fingers wrapped around the edge, I realized it was heavier than I thought. Not just heavy, but awkward, like the weight inside was uneven. I pulled it toward me carefully, and that's when the ladder shifted. It wasn't a dramatic movement, just a small slide, maybe an inch, but it was enough to make my stomach drop instantly. I froze, holding the bin against my chest, trying not to move. I looked down, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. One of the rubber feet at the bottom of the ladder was missing. The bare metal was resting on the concrete floor, and beneath it was a dark patch where someone had spilled oil at some point and never cleaned it properly. It wasn't sliding fast, but it wasn't stable either. It was balanced on a surface that had just enough slickness to make it unpredictable. I remember thinking very clearly that this was exactly how accidents happen. Not with some huge mistake, but with something small you don't notice until it's too late. I told myself to stay calm. I decided I would just step down slowly, keep my balance, and everything would be fine. I shifted my foot downward carefully. The ladder creaked again. The metal flexed slightly. Then I heard it. A sharp, metallic snap. It was the sound of something breaking under tension. Before I could even process it, the hinge in the middle of the ladder cracked, and the entire structure folded inward like it had been waiting to collapse. The bin flew out of my hands. The ladder dropped away beneath me. For a split second, I was weightless. And then my body pitched forward. Below me was the concrete floor. To the side was a heavy metal tool bench with a sharp corner sticking out at head height. I didn't have time to think. Instinct took over. I threw my arms out and grabbed the shelf with both hands, fingers digging into the wood so hard it hurt. The ladder hit the ground with a violent crash. My feet kicked uselessly in the air, and for a moment I was hanging there, heart pounding, arms shaking, knowing that if my grip slipped even slightly, I was going down. My uncle finally looked up at the sound. His face went pale immediately, and he rushed over, grabbing my legs and pulling me backward until I could get my feet on the floor again. We stood there in silence for a long moment, breathing hard, staring at the twisted ladder on the ground. The bin I had dropped had cracked open, spilling old tools and heavy metal parts across the concrete. One of them had landed exactly where my head would have hit if I'd fallen straight down. My uncle kept repeating quietly that he hadn't even thought about the ladder being unsafe. He'd used it for years. It had always been fine until it wasn't. None of it was supernatural. None of it was impossible. It was just a series of small, ordinary things lining up in the wrong way. And if my hands hadn't caught the shelf when they did, if my uncle hadn't been close enough to grab me, that would have been the story people told afterward about a simple accident in a garage. Ever since then, I look at ladders differently. I check the feet. I test the hinges. I don't assume something is safe just because it always has been. Because sometimes the only thing separating a normal day from a tragedy is one small snap of metal that you never saw coming.